Okay, and a very good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. This is Cafe Clairvoyance. This is the Tuesday evening spiritual show. And yes, we're doing two shows today. Isn't that exciting? So, well, we think it is. Anyway, very good evening to you. I hope you're well out there and having a wonderful morning, day, or whenever it is that's going on around you. A big warm welcome to you. And this is Cafe Clairvoyance. And let's start off with a bit of this. Well, tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I'm joined once again by a fabulous chap, really interesting guy. And I must admit, Andy Dominic, you may remember him, he came on, he talked about spiritual farming. And tonight we're going to go into the second part of this because it's just so interesting that I'm not in any way interested in gardening whatsoever. I'm quite happy to watch everyone else do it, but that's about my... But this guy is so interesting. I was so engrossed in it. It's so fascinating what goes into farming and growth of flowers, vegetables, fruits, things like this, that we got to do this again. And when we do this a spiritual way, then hey, hang on a minute, what is spiritual farming? And I'm so glad I met this guy because he's just so interesting, so out there, so much knowledge about this that it makes us think like Caitlin says, oh my god, I love plants. Okay, good. They're nice things. I know they're nice things. I bought some flowers for my mother yesterday, so she was very happy with that. Yeah. So flowers are nice, aren't they? Anyway, there we go. I'm rattling on too much about a subject I know nothing about. I know flowers are nice. There's green ones, red ones, blue ones, and orange ones, and that's about it. And Chelsea says, yes, she does. Well, this is so interesting. So already, all you ladies across the pond love flowers and plants. That's nice. Anyway, good evening to you other guys there. And I think, without further ado, I need to get this guy on because it is so out there with this information that I need to go and find out where he is. So I'll just see if he's back from the farm. Looking out there, there he is. He's out there somewhere. He's out there somewhere. No, he's... Oh, yeah, there he is. He just come back from the farm. No, there's no sign of a tractor. Anything like this. This is interesting. Okay, he's going to hit me in a minute. Anyway, right. So, very good evening to you, Andy. A warm welcome to you. Warm welcome. Lovely seeing you again. It's great to have you back and to talk about spiritual farming because last time you were on here, this was just incredible about spiritual farming. I mean, so basically, whereabouts are you? Whereabouts are you, Andy, in the world?
So we have a small holding in Merla, which is in the province of Alicante in Valencia in Spain. Yeah, we've got a beautiful little place here, about 14,500 meters, something like that, that is attached directly to the house. And then we've got another 16.5, which is just a little bit over the way. So it's about 3 kilometers from the house.
Okay.
But yeah, we started there actually. We had this land obviously when we came to the house, but didn't have enough money to fence it off. A nice, kind man that I know here had a bit of land with access to water. This family weren't doing anything with it, and he says, so long as I leave it tidy, whatever that means, I can use it. So we started there, literally planting some vegetables for sale. We were able to harvest those before the pigs, so we were able to get them to market, and that paid for a little bit of money. And we started to fence off the property here, and so now we're kind of like moving that stuff across. In between time, we had our son, who's now 2 years old, so that kind of slowed things down a little bit. But nevertheless, we're trotting away, and we shall move things over to the finca here in Merla in due course. Hopefully, be finished by the end of the summer.
Lovely. So this was interesting now because when we were talking about farming back in August, I think it was when you're last on the show, you're discussing about what plants go well together. In fact, that's the one thing we're going to discuss here is like what crops and plants grow well together, and how to get the best. I know we're coming into in the UK and Spain here. We're coming into winter, but you guys out there in the States and some of you in Australia, I believe, there are obviously in your summers, or it's still warm, so you're still growing things. But it's just
Yeah.
interesting here that last time you were talking about how to get what you got to do to the soil each harvest, and how you do this, and how you test it, because it's so there's so much physics goes so much chemistry and physics and all this information goes into this, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, we try to get we obviously have to start somewhere, so we try to analyze what the chemical base of the soil profile is, and then we look for things that we know are within a tolerant range of plant growth. So there'll be certain chemicals that need to be present in the soil at a certain part per million level, and that means, well, it doesn't. It means that it's there. The nutrients are in the soil, but obviously, what we're doing when we do this test is we're really just analysing the particle. So what I'm interested in is to know that the particle exists, so know that
Okay.
magnesium exists in the soil, and that doesn't really tell me anything, right? That just says, all right, there's X number of pounds of nitrogen per acre in this field. What does that tell me about what's actually happening with the magnesium? Next to nothing, really. And so what we do in combination is we do something called sap analysis, which allows us really to take a blood sample from the plants, if you like,
Okay.
and that then allows us to see what minerals the plants are carrying. But quite often what we see is that we can see a measure of a certain mineral in the soil, and then we see a deficiency in the plant. And it's that the plant can't absorb that mineral because it's not in the right bioactive state. It's not in a living state, if you will.
Okay.
So biology needs minerals, but they need minerals to be in a certain format before we can absorb it. And it needs to be, the minerals need to be in a living phase. So for me, really the trick is, how do we move from understanding a particle sense of magnesium in soil, for example, to understand its waveform, its spirit, if you like.
It's spirit.
So, and
Wow.
for me,
Okay.
when when we measure the sap analysis, we can see the spirit form of the nutrient, if you will. So we can see what it's doing. And that's what I mean by spirit form. We can see that the nutrient is active in the soil profile. It's active biologically, and that the plant's taking it up in the right form, and so that it's present in the food. And then when we consume that food, we're consuming nutrients in a bioactive form. So then our bodies can disassemble these compounds from the plant and reassemble them in a human image, if you will.
Okay. This
Whereas
just
what we quite often find in agriculture is a lot of the minerals have moved into a non-bioactive state. So it's very rare that you come across any soil profile anywhere in the world that's deficient in minerals.
okay.
What we often have is a breakdown between the transportation of those minerals from their raw organic state into a bioactive state, which then is transferable as food for a plant. And normally the missing link in that bit is biology. So what we're finding is that actually a lot of our farming practices degraded the biology in the soil. And so
Okay.
there's specialist microbiology that are mined, for example, say iron from the surface of clay, and then they'll take that to a plant, for example, and in exchange for sunlight energy, they'll give up some iron to the plant. But the plant is getting the iron in a biologically active state, if you
Wow.
like, an
Okay.
amino form.
So
So
when Joe blogs, when yourself here, whatever, you go off and you go to my dog is talking about gardening in the
I
background there.
can
You can
hear
hear
him.
him.
Yeah,
He's down the
wants
bottom
to
of the
join
stairs there,
in.
and I can't. I'm going to. I get to him in a minute.
He's bringing the astral energy
Yeah,
to
he
the
is. He's
to
doing
the,
that. He's
to the
barking at a
discussion,
plant.
mate.
The plant's going to do something. Yeah, like, yeah,
Yeah,
come on then. Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, So, Joe Blogs, like me, we go to the garden centre and we go and buy our peat. We go buy a peat
Yeah.
or our manure or stuff like that, and we go and stick it in the ground. We grow our roses, we grow our vegetables. Are we doing the right thing by doing that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of understanding how certain elements tie together. So, I mean, nitrogen itself is for me as a kind of spiritual farmer, it's an astral connection. So, I mean, it's to do with birds. It's to do animal activity, and for example, birds are astral beings, and they live in the canopy of trees, and they eat the fruit, and then they poop it out onto the floor. And actually,
Yeah.
that manure is the nitrogen in a living phase, if you will. And so that nitrogen then gets transported into the soil system, but that's not enough on its own. There needs to be other chemical elements occurring in the same sense in order to maintain that nitrogen in its living form. So
And
if we
can
don't,
you? Okay, and can you, in that bag of peat that you buy or whatever it is, or that garden fertilized soil, has it got all the
yeah,
minerals in there that you need?
it should have. If it's decent compost, it should have. I mean, technically, compost is a soil amendment. So, and what we do with that is actually we're, excuse me, my dog's going mad for the dinner.
You
So
got
we when
my dog and your dog.
yeah, I know. Between them, the two astral beings they are, mate, reminding us of their
Yes, they
impact
want to
on
fly.
nitrogen's efficiency.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so when you put that in the ground, I mean, there's a bunch of microorganisms in there. They come from a family called the archaea, and essentially those archaea are the type of microbes that I'm talking about, which will mine the organic material, convert it into a living mineral phase, and then hand it off to a plant, if you will.
Okay.
So when we put compost on the floor, effectively what we're doing is we're putting those microbes back, and that's technically what it is. We burn through those microbes as part of the course. They live and die in groups or whatever as part of the course of natural life. And so when we put compost on the floor, we're re-administering those microbes and inoculating the soil, if you will, back with those kind of mineral scavenging microorganisms. So
Okay. It sounds like
on,
the
mate, I'm
dogs
just
here
going to
want
get
to have. Sounds like the dogs want
yeah. So
something to happen.
I'll introduce him to everyone so he knows
Oh,
we're
bless.
working
Oh,
with
look, he wants.
Maggie and the
Oh,
Nines.
bless.
I know, bless him.
My dog will
So
be here in a minute, I should think. Yes. And I know
yeah,
Sarah, she's got a big dog. And yes, I'm sure your dog would like to play with your little dog too.
he's a Campo beast. This one, so he's a good boy, but he likes his food.
The Campo Beast. That sounds
Yeah,
like
he
like
is.
a
Yeah,
horror movie.
he is. Yeah.
It sounds like the Hounds of the Baskervilles and the Campo Beast.
Yeah. So yeah,
Okay,
I mean,
so yeah.
yeah. So for me, it is a case of as a kind of spiritual farmer, it's how do we understand the connections between the various chemicals which are essential for the organization that we call life, if you will. So how do we go from the chaos of the raw material into a beautiful plant, for example? So that's really what we're doing at the farm. And so we use a number of different practices to do that. So, for example, the manure we collect from specifically we collect that from lactating dairy cows. And the reason we choose lactating dairy cows is because we know that they've not been inoculated with any antibiotics.
Oh, okay.
So inside the manure of the cow will be a lot of lactic acid bacteria. So these are the probiotics that people probably have heard about in human diets.
Yes.
And again, essentially, those are doing the same sort of things. They're emboweled with astral energy, if you will, and they maintain nitrogen in its living form. But they do that in combination with other elements, if you
This
will.
is
So
so
sulfur being
interesting. So you make it sound such an interesting subject.
it really is. I mean, it really is. I mean, I mean, people. I mean, I probably think that most people are probably quite bored of the idea of farming because a lot of the way that we've spoken about farming or a lot of the way that we've done it is fairly disengaging. It kind of pushes people off the land. Whereas actually, if you start to really study the systems in soil, for example, like how nature reclaims past nutrient and replenishes the soil with historic plant, how that process happens is mind-boggling. You know, and truly, like one of the most beautifully efficient systems I think that you could ever describe anywhere to anybody. I mean, we all as human beings think that we've got everything covered, but when you start to look at certain things that happen between microbial relationships between plants and soil, and you study things like, now we know this process called rhizophagy, which is literally it's like, so I recruit a load of my friends, I call them all around me by offering them certain sweets and food that I know that they'll be deliberately attracted to. Then I basically absorb those into myself, and then all of the nutrients and all of the shopping that they've got with them then becomes mine, if you will, and I take it as and when I need it. And when I've finished and they've got no more shopping in their bag and no more food and there's no more benefit for me, I spit them back out into the wider world, where they go around and they fill their shopping bags again, at which point I sense that their shopping bags are full and I call them back to me again, and we repeat the process over and over again. And this is kind of how plants feed themselves in a natural situation.
And it's amazing.
And what we've been trying to do as human beings for the last 100 years plus is bypass that mechanism, because we thought we had a better system, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why we've got now shops full of nitrogen fertilizer. Actually, you know, where we live on a planet where the atmosphere is 78% nitrogen, and there's a system in process for taking that nitrogen out of the air, converting it into an amino acid form, i.e. embellishing it with all of the power of life, and then passing that on to all the plants that exist on the planet without our help. So what we've done is we've just come in and we've interfered with that process, and as ever, not really understood what the ramifications of that are. But now we're finding out, because the soil is literally disappearing by the football field load every hour of every single day all around the world.
It's sad when you see,
the integrity of it.
Yeah, it's sad when you see so many trees being chopped down and rainforest disappearing and all sorts here.
Yeah.
It's interesting here. Deborah, who's the producer of the show, and Deborah knows you very well, Andy. She's actually saying here, does Andy bless the land before planting, being a spiritual farmer?
We do, yeah. We have a kind of a mantra, and that's kind of on the gate of the field, actually. So anybody that walks into the field can read it now. We kind of had it up before. We were kind of conscious of the fact that now got a little bit bigger and a few people come onto the land. It's important that they carry the right energy onto the land with them, and so that message, we urge them to read it every time they go onto the field, because it basically gives thanks to the system that we're all benefiting from. So and also what we're trying to do, so we have this thing on our farm where my attention goes, the energy flows.
Yes.
So if I stand in my field, my hands on my head, complaining about weeds, weeds will be the bane of my life, mate.
So,
literally, yeah. If you start to concentrate on these things, then that tends to be what happens. So we kind of try and set that mantra up in a way that people carry that energy through with them, and that they're carrying the energy to grow the kind of productive plants that we want, to not get caught up in the minutiae of farming otherwise. So yeah, we do quite a lot of things that are in terms of blessing the land. And before we do anything, we always bless the land, and we always bless our own activity and each other. We try to do everything, obviously, with love. I try to empty my mind as well. I try not to go into the field when I'm angry.
Okay.
There's, whilst it's quite a healing process, farming, I try not to take anger into the field with me, because I think that carries through again. There's a lot of energy happening on the planet that's difficult for me to put my finger on and go, right, this is exactly how it is. But everybody knows. Everybody's walked in the wood and felt like somebody's watching them.
Yes,
when you're like in the wood,
I think everybody has. Yeah.
But everything is watching you in the wood. All the plants and all the animals are all aware of your presence in the wood. You've come into the system, whether you being detected or seen by plants which don't technically have any eyes and don't technically have any ears, but they know you're coming. I mean, for example, there's studies that have been done now to prove this as well. So people like walk into a field and snap a branch every time they go in there.
Okay.
And other people go into the field and they talk nicely to the plants, and they talk with respect and leave with respect and don't do any harm. And then we measure the electrical activity. What we were finding was that the plants were screaming. When the person that we set to break the branches went in every day, the plants would have a different signal that they would emit, an electrical frequency they would emit, like a scream, if you will. Like, oh my God, here comes Phil. He's a so-and-so. He'll break all our branches.
I wouldn't, guys.
You don't even have to break a branch at that point. Yeah? You only have to approach the field, and all the plants are already on high alert. You already know. You only have to do it a couple of times, and the plants learn about you, know that you're going to be a problem for them, and as such, they start to react as a community to you way before you've even set foot in the forest. So, like, as you're walking up the path to it, they're already going, oh shit, here comes Phil, let's put our defenses up, blah blah blah. So yeah.
So this is so interesting. When we're talking about this subject, we're talking about spirituality, we're talking to the plants. I mean, I remember years ago, one of my tutors said to me, he said, go and buy 2 plants, don't feed them. I thought, this is cruelty, but there you go. Yeah. He says, talk to one, but don't talk to the other. Yeah. And just put your hands around the plant like that, just like engage with it. And it was interesting because the one I was putting my hands around and talking to lived, and the other one just got fed up and died. That was sorry about the cruelty there. I was cruel. Yeah, I do apologise. I hope that plant forgives me. But but it's just a test to say it does work. Energy, I think it's right what you say. Where energy flows, your attention goes. Where attention goes, energy flows rather.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that's. I try not to think about those sorts of things. You know, I don't think about my plants having a low yield. I don't think about weeds. I don't think about insect problems. We set up to not deal with that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, and also what we do is we try to learn as much as we can about plants so that we're not offended by them. People seem to be bothered, you know, when they see a plant growing next to their pea plant. They're like, what's this plant? It's not my pea plant. Let's pull it out, ground, and throw it away. Actually, you know, that plant might be bringing something to the whole system.
Yes.
You just haven't understood. And so there's each plant has different relationships with different sets of microbes, and they do different things when they move elements into different states, if you will, from oxidized to reduced. And so unless you understand the plant, I'd leave it in the ground first.
Okay.
And you know, and then just sit back and watch. We don't do enough of that these days. You know, a lot of people just see another plant growing next to their plant and decide to just kill it. It's just like, you know, let's put some herbicide down on the floor. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. Like, have you understood what it is you're killing? Because that plant, for example, may exude certain compounds into the soil that attract a certain group of microbes, which might be important to the survival of your plant as well as that plant, for example. So, you know, like, certain plants are good at solubilizing phosphorus. They accumulate lots of these microbes around them, which spend all day like solubilizing phosphorus. Phosphorus is really important to plants because it's the currency of energy. If you don't have any phosphorus, then the plant's got no energy, then it can't do all the functions that it needs to for the day. So of course it won't fulfill its potential.
Interesting. This is so interesting.
Yeah. This is the thing that we need to get is rather than competitive. And in farming, we've always been taught that everything is in competition with everything else, and that's just not true.
Okay, we've got a few questions coming up here. One of them's from a lady called Sarah. She says, I don't know much about plants. Does this have anything to do with permaculture?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent. I mean, permaculture is just the practice of literally, like, so I'll dig a plant bed and then I'll leave that in one place, if you will. Okay. And permaculture is, how do I maintain the fertility of that one fixed piece of space? Every time you grow a plant, obviously, when the plant, especially plants that we eat, they mine the minerals out of the ground. And if we then cut that plant and eat it, taking those mineral resources out of the soil.
Okay.
So permaculture is really just a set of processes in your mind that allows you to sort of replace the missing nutrient to make sure that it's sustainable for the next growing season. You know, not just the one that you've just had. So really, we're kind of. I mean, yeah, we do permaculture. That's what we do. We create planting beds and they stay in one place, and we rotate crops across those beds using an ancient crop rotation practice.
Oh,
We're really interested now in how we get the chemistry and the biology to work collectively as quickly as possible, and what's the order, what's the sequence of order. So, you know, we use a lot of things that we call biodynamic preparations to kickstart certain processes that we think might have stalled.
that's a fantastic phrase. That to just go and talk to someone, just saying we're having a biodynamic preparation. By
Yeah,
people look at you. That's nice. Yeah, that's good.
yeah. So I mean, we do some things that people might, you know, not everybody, but a lot of people will kind of frown at. So obviously we're interested in making sure that we've got plenty of animals on the farm, because they'll bring the manure, and with the
Okay.
manure they bring the nitrogen, and that's an
Yeah.
astral force. But also, in order to get that astral force moving into the living phase, we need etheric energy. So we need warmth and light and tone.
Okay.
And so quite often what we'll do is we'll bury manure in horns in the ground at a certain time of year. And then we'll also bury alongside that maybe something like yarrow. So
Okay. So you put a horn, a horn of like a cow or something like this,
yeah,
into the
yeah, yeah,
ground.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, why we use that? I mean, obviously cows are astral beings as well. We're astral beings. Protozoa in the soil are astral beings. Why we do that is typically with a horn manure. The shape of the horn, effectively what we're doing is with that shape is it reflects its, so the cow has its own ego reflected back at itself through the horn.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do is empower astral energy through the horn into the manure. So once we
Okay.
bury that in the ground for a certain period of time and we dig it back up again, then we sieve that material and we add it to water and brew it just like you'd make a cup of tea. And then we spray that onto the plants at certain times of year when we know that nitrogen is moving out of the living phase, i.e., that there's nitrogen in the system, but it's not getting into my plant.
Is that the same thing when your tomato plants they start to die after you picked off some of the tomatoes? Is that because they're running out of nitrogen?
Um, right. So, yeah, there's a couple of issues we're sort of stepping across. So tomato plants specifically, or tomato plants or fruit plants, normally what happens is everybody grows tomato plants and they grow really brilliantly. Then all of a sudden they'll start producing tomatoes and then the tomato plants start to get sick. That's
Yes.
normally people's experience. So the reason that happens in actual fact is a hormone shift. So as the plant starts to produce a tomato or a fruit, those fruits are packed with seeds. And so the plant itself then moves into a phase where it tries to pack those seeds with growth hormone called auxin.
Okay.
Auxin is the thing that we relate auxins to shoot. So it's the thing that makes the plant move upwards, if you will.
Okay.
So it's the thing that when your seed germinates and it pops out of the ground, auxin is the growth hormone that's forcing that plant upwards into the
This is
light.
so interesting. This is so interesting.
Yeah. But at the same time that happens, so as auxin starts to accumulate and it gets past a certain threshold level, it clips another growth hormone in the plant called cytokine. Now, cytokine is the root growth hormone. So when we get too much shoot growth hormone, we
Yes.
clip the cytokine, which means the root no longer grows. So if you imagine we've got root in the soil, hang on, you can see my hand there. It
Yep.
stops at that point. And once I've absorbed all the minerals and nutrients that are within touching distance of my root structure, that's it. I've got no more access. Because
Okay.
my roots are no longer growing, I'm not growing into fresh resources. So then
Right.
I start to deplete the minerals. When I start to deplete the minerals, I can no longer complete proteins. That means I can't complete code, which means that my life starts to break down, if you will. And that's when all of these pathogens like botrytis or early blight or late blight start to move in, and the tomato plant then starts to die away. That's literally why.
Okay. Sarah says that reminds me of Viking farming.
I don't know what Viking farming is. Sorry,
No,
Sarah.
I haven't
I'll
got a
have to
clue.
look at
Ask a
that.
Viking.
That sounds very interesting.
It
Sounds
does.
very
It
interesting.
does.
Sounds like,
And Des Harris says, "Can you pass on the mantra? I'd love to put it in my field. I have a public footpath through it." Oh wow, Debs, that's interesting. That's brilliant.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Yeah, and also people will stop and they'll be interested and maybe if they see you out, then you can explain what it is that you're doing. And
Oh,
I think
fantastic.
people are. I mean, most people I find are really interested in what we do. Some people think we're strange, but actually, a lot of people really are interested, and specifically because a lot of people can see that it's doing something. So, I mean, that's the funny thing about it. I mean, when someone said to me, "Hey, you should get some animal manure, put it in some cow horns, and bury it in your field on the winter equinox, and dig it up on the spring equinox," and when the first person told me that, I was like, "What? Why would I?
Yep.
Why would I do
Yep.
that?" And it was just, and literally he didn't really have anything to say to me. He said, "Listen, I can't tell you, just do it and then see if you notice any difference." Sure enough,
That's
what we
interesting
did.
because
And when
I
we
totally
because we are quite observant, when we noticed, we were like, "Hang on a second, this is really doing something." So when I stuff a male deer bladder with dried yarrow flowers and then I bury that in my field, literally for some reason it kickstarts silica in the field. I'm still to this day struggling to really understand what it is that's happening there.
okay.
But what we know is when we pack arrow flowers into the bladder of a male deer and we bury that in the ground or we hang it in the sunlight, technically that deer preparation, and literally it dries out and we bury it in the field, we dig it back up, and again we make a tea with the product at the end of the day. And there seems to be some awareness to the compounds in the yarrow that are extracted that aren't present if you don't go through that process.
That is so fascinating.
I can only suggest that the awareness of the deer is imparted into the yarrow itself.
That must
really
be, yes, I can understand.
do you know when I sort of say to people, I try to say, listen, scientifically, if I try and explain this to you using normal science, you're probably just going to look at me and say, "What?" This is where there's like a kind of like almost like an element of faith. You have to have faith in the concept of it, and when you do, you'll see it working. And still to this day, I'm like, people say, "But how does it work?" And I say, "Well." All I know is that the yarrow carries the oxygen, and the oxygen is the thing that maintains the nitrogen in its living phase. So it's kind of like the precursor to maintaining nitrogen in its living phase. And I can only, yeah.
That's amazing. It's so interesting.
Kind
Everybody says this is interesting. Debs Harris says I want to learn more about this. And Debs always says, she said, "Oh my days, so much to learn. I've watched plants and was blown away with the Christmas tree moved itself for some snowdrop bulbs."
Yeah, I mean, certainly. Really good example of this.
That's amazing. Wow, Debs, that must be incredible to watch.
So we've got I've got two walnut trees in the back garden, and one of them is the matriarch tree, or the mother walnut tree, if you like. The second one was brought in at a later stage, so it's not related.
Okay.
And the big walnut tree that I've got is overgrowing the small walnut tree. On the other side, walnuts have dropped, and I just let them seed, so they've just started to produce baby walnut plants. The tree has stopped growing on that one side, so it's almost like it's saying, "Oh, there's my kids. I can't grow my branches over my kids because they won't get any light and then they won't grow properly." The walnut tree on the other side is not related to me, so tough.
This is so.
And
This is so
literally,
interesting.
if you look in my garden, you'll be like, you can literally see it. I don't have to explain it. You can literally see it happening. The big tree is bullying the non-related walnut tree. The walnut trees that are related, it's kind of backing away from. And I think that there's some community relationship between plants. It's quite possible that plants that are across species will give themselves that same kind of respect, if you will,
Okay.
because they understand that the presence of snowdrops is beneficial to the tree for the wider season. You know, without the snowdrops occurring at a certain time of year, probably you might find an abundance of root-eating nematodes that would start to occur and damage the tree just as it's coming out of its winter dormancy, and that might cause a problem. But the snowdrops in the soil, because the snowdrops are secreting a certain compound into the soil, it pushes those root nematodes away out of the system.
A little tiny
They don't want to
snowdrop
be.
is going to move
Yeah.
a Christmas tree.
Yeah, I mean, snowdrops are really good anti-insecticide. I mean, this is the thing. If you find that all of those plants that come out really early in spring don't get attacked by insects, so why is that? You know,
Yes.
why do snowdrops appear every year? The first flower to appear, so there's nothing else, yeah, and yet it doesn't get predated. I mean, that does not make sense, right? Because you're thinking it's the only dinner on the table, and yet nobody's eating it. Yeah, they must all be hungry because they've all just gone through winter as well, right? So they're
Yes.
waking up. They must be hungry. You don't find those plants get eaten at all.
You don't, do you?
They just
No.
don't. No.
Oh, amazing.
Because naturally
amazing.
they contain a high amount of, if you will, insecticide.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
but snowdrops only last a certain time, then, don't they? Then that's it. They've gone, haven't they?
Yeah. But they only need to last a certain amount. So I would argue that snowdrops last for exactly as long as they need to. And if you think that basically what we're trying to do is fill a gap.
Yes.
So there's an energy gap, right? The tree can't synthesize all the compounds it needs to defend itself at that moment in time. So the snowdrops come into the system. They do the secretion of the compounds, which keeps the predators at bay or stops them from taking over. And once the snow, by which time there's more kinetic energy in the system, more heat, more light, more tone, all of the minerals are in a living stage, and it's not necessary because the tree can start to sequence its own defensive strategy.
So if
but I think early in the season, the snowdrops are almost like God's answer to insects appearing at the start of the season and damaging plants and potentially affecting them for the rest of the year.
So is it good then to plant snowdrops around plants that are going to come out later on in the year? Because would they get they taking in this anti-insecticide with them? But the plants that are going to come up afterwards, would they be able to take some of that?
What we're doing, I think, is really, it's just, if you imagine there's somebody, I was trying to think of the best way to describe it, really. It's almost like they're like a nightclub bouncer. Nightclub's not quite open yet, but people are trying to get in.
Yeah.
And obviously the bouncers are like saying, can't come in yet because we're not ready. Right. We're not ready for you.
There's a bouncer on the door saying your name's not on the list, you're not coming in.
Yeah. So I think, and what I think these plants do is they kind of fill that short-term gap. So whether it's beneficial for all plants or not, I don't know. I honestly don't know enough about it to answer that question. But like certainly, I think for some plants or for some soil communities, then they're particularly beneficial. But you can carry that process on. And we grow calendula with tomatoes and peppers, for example. Again, calendula officinalis or marigold, if you like. Again, secretes a compound into the soil which deters a type of worm that eats the root structure of tomato plants, which then causes a later infection. So if you're growing certain plants with tomato plants, you can technically help to reduce the impact of those negative worms on your tomato crop.
Yeah, they're not good worms, those things.
No, you don't want pathogenic nematodes.
It looks like.
But
Sarah Kay says here. Sarah Kay.
There's a lot of good work though, man.
Yeah. She's one of the Vikings by the sound of this. She says the Vikings used to make sacrifices to the field for good harvest. It was many years ago and not necessarily as civilized as now.
You could argue that we kind of do we kind of do that. So we with the yarrow preparation. I mean, yarrow in effect, what yarrow does for me is it opens the door for the astral body. And actually,
Okay.
it's rumored that witches used to fly around in the astral sky on yarrow stalk, right?
Some still do.
So that's
We-
yeah. So I gather. So, but definitely, that's it engages the presence of yarrow engages nitrogen in the living form.
Okay.
So,
I think where with Sarah, it's a good idea with her ideals of farming is ever there's a sacrifice for her field to stay well away. Steer
yeah,
clear.
we don't do any actual sacrifice. We cut down some broccoli at the end.
Broccoli, that do. Okay. Nabila asks, she says, do plants compete with each other then?
Yeah, some plants do. So there's some plants that don't live very well with plants. Fennel's a good example, actually. They always say you should plant fennel on its own. Again, I think that it's because fennel has a compound in it called jonglin, which is like in a concentrated form is a herbicide.
Okay.
So it will secrete a compound into the soil that will prevent other plants from growing effectively.
Oh dear. Yeah, fennel's so good for you, isn't it?
There's loads of plants that have this. Like walnut is another good example. Like people say, don't make compost out of walnut leaves and what have you, because specifically it contains that compound and it's a herbicide for
that's
many
interesting.
plants. But there's lots of plants that will grow in it, no problem at all. But it's a good idea if you're making it to know what those plants are first.
Yes, good.
Yeah.
And Deb says also
there's companion plants and then there's competing plants, but there's less competition in life than we would be led to believe.
We're all have to find out who's winning. Oh dear. I've also known plants to kill other plants that I've introduced to a bed. It's so interesting. Yes, I think there are some.
For sure that definitely happens. Yeah, there's like I said, there's certain plants that are not good to plant in with other plants. They're a bit unruly.
Okay.
Get going quickly. Again, for me, it's those plants that are really successful are really fascinating to me. I normally it's a case of plants that grow really easily. I believe grow really easily because they can formulate relationships with pretty much anybody, if you will.
Okay.
They're kind of like they're real social creatures, if you will, and they're able to convince lots of other organisms to help them. And so, sort of like Japanese hogweed, for example, the reason that's so successful is it has so many different biological markers, whereas a sunflower can only form relationships with a very limited number of biological organisms in the soil. And so if those organisms are not present, then the chances that you'll grow prize winning sunflowers are remote.
That is interesting because I've grown sunflowers amongst other flowers, and the sunflower hasn't been very successful at all.
Yeah, I mean, sunflowers are really good at kind of like bringing certain microbes into the soil to kickstart systems. But actually, there are soil systems where sunflowers won't grow very well, and that's normally because the certain microbes that they form relationships with are just not present.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So, question. Because we're talking about spiritual farming, we're talking about blessing the field, we're talking about going in there with a mantra. I know Deb was asking here, Deb was asking, what is the mantra? Is there some that you're happy to share? Because she would like to do some.
What I'll do, Phil, is I'll share it with you and then you can post it to your Facebook page.
Yes.
I don't know whether I've got a copy to hand because I'm on Natalie's computer.
Okay, gotcha. Even if Natalie wants to post in, if she's got a mobile phone and she's on the Cafe Clairvoyance page, she just type it in; it will come up on the.
Unfortunately, she's upstairs monitoring. We wonder, mates.
Wonder, mates. Right. Okay.
We will do it though. Don't.
No, that's fine. So what we do is we're going to post that into the Cafe Clairvoyance group. If you guys want to look at it, then
I mean, everyone can change it as well if they want.
There you go. So you've got one there for your garden, for your flower pots, or your field, whatever it is you got there.
Pretty much, yeah.
And for those who live in apartments, it's going to be for your little flower pots on your porch or your patio. Yes, or your balcony, shall I say? Yes, you'll be talking to them. But I do agree though. I do agree. If you talk to your plants, they will respond to you. And
I mean, there's probably a number of reasons. There's a new French study actually that has just been done on plants growing and certain signals that they get from certain chords that are played.
okay,
So, and they've determined that certain chords in musical chords can be used to switch on and off certain parts of the growth cycle of a plant's life.
well, I'm getting an amplifier for Christmas for my guitar, so I'll be taking this around the house and playing music, much to my
See plants.
dog's disgust, and
I'll,
probably
I'll try and
Deborah's.
find you that. I'll try and find you the study, mate, so you'll know
And the
what the
chords,
right
let me know the
notes.
chords if it's
Yeah,
E or G or D.
yeah.
So just those basic ones there. And I go around and I play those and I'll see what happens to the plants. I'll probably
I
end
do
up with the
think,
guitar wrapped around my head, but the plants will probably grow fine.
but yeah, I mean, it definitely there's something to be said for kind of vibration, as it were. And I think that's what it really is that we're vibrating certain vibrations are like signals, if you will, so like or
Yeah.
switches, and they turn on and off certain systems inside us. Or and I
Okay.
think that it's a kind of undiscovered phenomenon, really, vibration.
Oh, I think energy vibration amongst flowers, and we can do that through sound, can't we? I mean, I've seen people put salt onto a drum, and you
Yeah,
just bounce the sound, and the pattern the salt makes is
yeah,
unbelievable. It's beautiful. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, this is all very interesting to me how that kind of process works and what's going on there. That's really like
okay.
interesting to me.
Yeah, I think it is.
And can I use it? And can I use it on my farm? That's the other
Yes,
thing.
yeah, yeah, and exactly what music you could play to your plants as you're going around. Is
Yeah,
there a drum of some kind or a harmonious instrument? That is fascinating. What about
yeah,
crystals? Do you plant crystals in the soil
yeah.
as you start
We
as
use
you
a
start a
lot of
harvest?
well, we use paramagnetic material, different sorts. That can be certain crystals, but we use a lot of shungite as well in the
Shungite,
field at the
yes.
moment. Yeah. Um, Again, paramagnetism helps the elements in the soil to organize. So really, that's what it's doing, is it? And through the organisation means the access is a little bit more efficient. It certainly, we again noticed the difference when we planted beds up with shungite, and also we started doing and making geometric shapes out of the shungite in the soil. Maybe we had too much time on our hands, but we started to kind of mimic geometric shapes and actually design geometric shapes of shungite inside the planting beds and see whether that made any difference, to see what shapes
Now
work
that's
the best or
interesting.
not the
That
best.
is so
Or
interesting because if you
yeah,
use astrography, which is the movement of the planets going as they pass your farm. So you
yeah,
got the sun's path and its ecliptic. You got the moon's cycle, where the different points of where they're not necessarily intersecting, but like Venus coming along, Mercury coming along, Jupiter, Saturn. Jupiter is about growth and expansion, Saturn about restriction, but the path they're taking, lining that up with those planets, I think that could have an effect. So your shungite there should be able to resonate with that, putting it
yeah,
into symbol forms. I reckon that would work.
yeah. We certainly we do. We try to use as much of the kind of universal energy as we're gifted freely. So certainly, there's certain times of the day when you can go outside. When the sun's really low in the atmosphere and it's picking up all that energy through the real thick part of the Earth's atmosphere,
Oh
and then
yes,
it's transporting that to me or any other living organism that happens to be within its path at that moment in time. And it kind of sets. It's really relaxing, right? At certain times of the day when you can go outside and actually there's like a stillness to the world at that point, and yeah, that's kind of like almost like the precursor to kind of energy. It's
yes.
like let's set this all off for the day. And again, it happens in the evening as well. There's certain times where I've been on the farm when I really sort of it sort of feels really harmonious at certain times of the day. Whereas in midday sun, everything's a bit grizzly, and especially here in Spain in the summer, all the plants look a little bit sad because they're really hot. And
They are. They get a bit too hot. They need a bit of
yeah,
shade, a bit of aircon.
Yeah.
But Nabila says here, Prince Charles wasn't so bad then as people thought, where it comes to about talking about plants and animals. It's interesting because he's got the moon in Taurus, which is an earth sign.
Yeah, well, actually, we use the moon actually in terms of it's sort of like for reflecting the sun's energy. So we
Yes.
make a nettle bio preparation, and that's always made at night time within the full
Brilliant.
moon cycle.
Brilliant. Yes.
Again, nettles are full of vitamins, specifically to do with the heart or the blood, if you will. That's the same in plants as well. So we can increase the efficiency of nutrient transport by adding a nettle tea at a certain time of the year to the plants. If we feel that the plants are lacking in certain minerals, for example, then we might make a nettle tea. We also use chamomile as well, which is used for digestion.
Okay.
We use oak bark as well. Oak bark's another one that we use in the night time. So again, there's a kind of reflection of ether.
I think yes, I agree with you. I think it's absolutely such an interesting subject to this. Now, another question I was going to ask you is so when we got our vegetables, we're getting ready for the spring next year. We start planting our vegetables, get the cabbages going, and the carrots and the peas. Are there vegetables which grow well together?
Yeah, so all vegetables either fall into a category of either oxidating or reducing. So,
Okay,
and it's important to know where those vegetables are on that map. Because if you follow an oxidating vegetable with an oxidating vegetable, you sort of tend to burn the soil a bit too quickly.
okay,
So the plants tend to not do particularly well. So that's what we're doing with rotation technically, is we're moving between those groups of plants, or if you like, groups of microorganisms in the soil. So we've a plant like a tomato, which is an oxidizing plant. It uses a lot of oxygen, introduces a lot of oxygen into the soil, burns through a lot of nutrients really, really quickly. And then we'll follow that up with a legume, for example, a soy or something like that. But
okay,
yeah, there's certain things that we plant together. So we would never plant corn without planting soy alongside it. So we always plant maize or corn with a legume.
okay.
Um, just because those two things, it's like this is where 1 + 1 = 11 and not two,
Uh,
if you
oh,
will.
oh, right.
So
Okay, okay,
if that makes sense, yeah. So by putting soy with the maize, the yield of the maize is much higher, much more closer to its potential. If you just try and grow corn on its own, then it can get some problems.
okay. So when we're talking about broccoli and things like this, is there plants? Would you be able to name off a few there, a few vegetables, for example, that we shouldn't grow next to broccoli or next to cauliflower or potatoes or anything like that? Is there something you say, "Oh, don't put those two together; they don't work"?
Yeah, I mean, if I won't put a brassica next to a brassica, if you will, so I won't put a cabbage next to a broccoli plant.
Ah,
So we are now working on a new bed design where we're planting different types of groups of plants in the bed to see what difference that makes. So obviously we've gone through a lot of the literature, and I can literally point you to literature which will say these plants do well together, these plants don't do well together. Um, Actually, I don't. I find that's oversimplified anyway. When you try to do it in real life, you tend to find the reality of it that's different to the outcome in the book, for example. But that again, if you're not testing the soil chemistry, you're not testing the soil biology, then you're really just guessing anyway at that point, right? So, and
okay.
we don't want to farm guessing really. That's why we test so much, really.
Because I must admit, you do a delivery of vegetables in our area, and we
Yeah.
get delivery of you each week, and the difference in taste compared to anywhere else is phenomenal. It's gorgeous. I got to say, I think it's fantastic. Have you got a website at all?
No, at the moment, no, we don't have a website. I mean, the reason I haven't got a website is um, mostly to do with the fact that actually there's quite a lot of carbon activity going on with websites and stuff, right? So the more social media I have, the more carbon I need to sequester the
Okay.
farm, because the more I'm costing. So,
well, if you guys are out in Spain near our area, which is anywhere between, I would say, I'd imagine where you are. I imagine you come down to sort of Benito all the way up to Javier.
yeah, we go from Calpe, right the way to Javier, pretty much to almost to Denia.
Almost in, yeah.
We don't do
Okay.
Denia at the moment, but we're almost that far. But we don't need to do any more than that, really. And what I would prefer is that somebody else like set us up a small holding and manages that, or several people do. There's so much room now. I don't know if you saw, there was a news article. It was certainly in the UK press the other day about land inequality, which has risen by 41% in the last decade or something. It's literally ridiculous. Sort of 70% of the world's agriculture is run by 1% of the world's population, and actually a lot of those people are investment people, so they're bankers or whatever, and they own the land, and then they contract farm it out. And what we're finding typically in that area is that there's more monoculture. Where there's more monoculture, there's more pollution, there's more environmental damage, and there's a higher cost to that. Actually, people like myself who are managing small holdings, and again, we were discussing that before we came on air,
Yes.
that actually most of the world's small holdings are run by women. So
that is incredible. The farmers are, and I'm not saying it sounds completely insulting to be very sexist.
Yeah,
but you don't. You always
doing
think.
It, yeah.
You always think you always used to think that your doctor was a man, the pilot was a man, and that the secretary was a woman, but now, so more farmers now are women.
Yeah. Actually, on well tended small holdings like we've got. So if you the bigger the farm, the more likely you are to get engaged in the sort of processes which are ultimately damaging the environment and unbalancing ecosystems. The small holding farms are in the majority run by women. And one of the interesting facts about small holdings is that actually, whilst we're at only 30% of the agricultural sector, we grow 70% of the world's food, and we do it with less than 30% of the energy used in the agricultural sector overall.
That's incredible.
So,
that's incredible.
And yes. Because people always say to me, "Oh, you can't feed the world with farms like yours," and it's like, you really can. We are doing it.
You can.
You're out of shape. You've imagined that somehow or other that you need hectares and hectares of land in order to feed the world. Actually, what you don't is you need lots of people like me with little bits of land, managing it carefully, growing little bits of food and servicing little groups of people who are local to the farm. So any of you guys and yourself to the farm to have a look around, you can come and have a look and you can see what's going on. You can even come and pick some food fresh off the plants if you really wanted to. So that to me is where really the future of this is all going. And actually there's lots and lots of people looking for jobs, and there's lots of meaningful employment on the land. People have to reinvent farming, as it were. And again, it's on a small scale where we've got personal contact with our customers. My customers, when they buy vegetables from me, they can pretty much guarantee that the only person that's touched the vegetable apart from them is me. There isn't a stream of people. There's not a lorry driver and a fruit picker and a distribution manager and a supermarket shelf stacker and this, that, and the other. There's literally, I pick the food off the field. We put it into a box and we deliver it to a customer, and that's it.
And it's fantastic. It tastes amazing. Yeah. I can't recommend enough guys out there that to avoid some of the big boys and instead go to all the big manufacturers, the big shops, and actually buy from your local produce from a farmer. Oh my goodness!
Yeah, and also one of the things from what we're learning about now, we've got a closer connection to our customers. Actually, we're moving more to what management people will call a lean pool model, whereas before we would just try to grow food, right, and then we would try to push that onto the market.
Yeah,
and we then end up with like waste at the start and waste at the end. So what we're trying to do now is get you guys to tell us what it is that you want, and then we'll grow that and try to grow only that, so that we're not growing in excess of what we actually require.
That's a good idea. I think it's a
And,
really good
yeah, and that
idea.
all of so that we're trying to cut down waste wherever we can. That's why we deliver in reusable crates and avoiding additional plastic waste. Again, it's about trying to look at the way the food industry is at the moment and know that it can be done better, and then just do it and start doing it. Don't wait for somebody to make it better for you, because
Yes.
that's not going to
Yes.
happen. Let's just get on, pull our
Yeah.
socks up and get on with it. I mean, if this COVID thing has taught us anything, it's just that a lot of the time we're the ones that have to get on and fix it ourselves, because our governments are just overwhelmed by
I agree with
complexity
that.
of
I
trying to
agree with
manage
that.
it.
I think if you're sorting out yourself, that's the best way to go and do it. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow, and this has been absolutely terrific. And also thank you so much everybody who joined the conversations tonight. It's been it's thoroughly interesting the amount of people who are so interested in this, know a fair bit about it. And Debs, I must admit, you probably are the most active on this, because you've got a field, and your family and your boys want to do exactly what you're saying there, and which is to develop fields to be able to do the farming there yourself. She says, me and my boys want to do what you're saying. And she wants to love to live that way, she's saying here as well, where you're creating your own vegetables. And
Yeah, it's really. I mean, it's actually really quite. It's a lot easier than. I mean, I can sometimes, when people listen to me, they're like, "Gee, well, God, that sounds really complicated." And it's only because I'm the sort of person that's really interested in minutiae of how things work.
yes,
So, how is atmospheric nitrogen taken from its relatively inert state and moved into an amino acid form inside a plant? I'm really interested in all of that, but you don't have to know that in order to grow a vegetable. You don't have to know that.
but I think it's
You don't need
interesting
lots of.
hearing it
The
from
other
you
thing, you
though.
don't need lots of equipment either. So come to my farm, have a look. I ain't even got a bloody tractor, mate. People they literally say to me, "Where's your tractor?" I'm like, "Got a tractor? What do I want a tractor for?" A tractor just means that I'm going to do things to the soil that's not beneficial in the long term. So what we do is we get pieces of cardboard, unprinted if we can. We put that on the floor. We typically go for 1 meter wide, because I can step over 1 meter pretty easily. So that's how wide we go. We put the cardboard on the floor, then we get a load of compost and we pile that on top. Normally, in American money, we're talking 8 to 10 inches. In European money, we're talking sort of 20, 25 centimeters, 30 centimeters of compost on top of the cardboard. We put the plant straight on top of that. Cardboard rots down into carbon. Carbon is houses for microbes. It reinvigorates the soil. It balances the compost, because sometimes compost can be a bit too heavy in the nitrogen zone. And so you tend to get less insect pests, but it means no one's got to do any digging. I mean, it's hard work digging in Spain. You'll probably bear testament to. I don't know if you've done any
Yep,
digging here, but it's bloody hard work, especially in the summer when the soil's dry. So why
it's
bother?
so dry and so hard, isn't it? Yeah.
And when you know that actually by doing that process, you're damaging the integrity of the soil. So every time you dig it, you're actually damaging it.
Yeah.
So, like it's like, I don't know, you don't go out in the midday sun with all your clothes off covered in cooking oil or whatever and expect not
No,
to get
no,
sunburned.
you're not ready for the barbecue. I think if you want to borrow a tractor, Debs has said she's got a 60-year-old tractor.
Yeah,
So,
I have actually got a 60-year-old two-wheel tractor it's called, lovingly referred to as the ankle breaker. It's left in the corner of the farm, and nobody touches it because it literally is lethal. It will suddenly lurch into gear.
I know
It's
those things. I
definitely
know those
dangerous.
things, and they go for it, don't they? They're pretty.
Yeah, and it will drive over a bank out wall without any problem, and it will drive over you as well if you're not careful. So, yeah, I mean, literally, we tried it. We did all that. We used the tractor to clear the land, and then we found all that was happening was that we were getting a lot more of a specific type of weed that was growing, and that was typically field bindweed. Field bindweed is one of those. Somebody put a question up: are there any bad plants? well, I mean, field bindweed, I don't want to give it a bad press, but if you've got plants that are growing, it will wrap around those plants and it'll literally bind up all the branches. It will stop the airflow, and then you'll get mold and rot, and the plant will die. It won't get enough sunlight or whatever, you know.
Okay.
So there are certain plants, because it's like a vine, if you will. You know, once it finds something, it will grow up and sort of lasso around it.
It does that? See that stuff? It's absolutely wicked stuff, isn't it? Yes.
But interestingly, you know, a lot of native tribes use field bindweed as an anti-cancer treatment. So, and whilst we criticise it for strangling my pepper plant or whatever, it has a lot of potential benefit, and we're studying it now. So,
and if it's all right with you, I think we need to have you back again in the spring. And talk about.
I mean, there's literally so much. I think what we need to do, and maybe the people that are listening might be is if people have got a specific interest area that they want to talk about, because obviously, as you'll appreciate, it's such a massive subject. We could literally talk all night about.
Yes, we could. I'm aware of this.
Nettle preparation. So, you know, what we need to sort of try to do is say to people, right, what's the most interesting subject area you've got, and then we'll literally do a whole presentation on that.
Why don't we do that? Why don't we do that? And we get some,
because otherwise we sort of leap around a bit, and I feel sometimes people are like, hang on, there's so much information, it feels like it's sort of whacking you on the side of the head rather than going in.
It's incredible. Andy, what can I say? Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been so interesting, and I must admit, every time I see you, whether we're out for a drink somewhere or we meet up around friends' houses, it's always so interesting to just listen to your stories, and it makes gardening sound so interesting, or growing crops so interesting.
I mean, it really is. I mean, it's all life, mate. It really is one of the most.
I've got to stop you there. I've got to stop you. We're going to go.
It's bloody hard to get rid of.
Yes, absolutely. And I'd just say a big warm thank you to you. If you could send us, if people want your contact details, and they're in the area, are you happy for us to send them on?
Yeah, for sure. If people have questions or whatever that they need to talk to me about, sometimes I can be quite busy. So, you know, obviously don't feel I'm not talking to you if I don't get straight back to you, but I will obviously answer any questions that you've got. And if you want to take pictures of your plants or whatever and send them to me or whatever.
Magic. Let's do that.
Online diagnostics. The other thing is, now we're about to pick up a radionics machine. I don't know whether you guys, I think your better half knows a little bit about radionics, given that she's a dowsing rod sort of person. And that's kind of technically radionics. So we're looking at that now as well. So, and there are some things that we can do where we can look at images. So people take photographs, we can use a radionics machine to measure sort of bottlenecks in energy from photographic images. So
on this note, just before we go, I would like to say actually we're about to get storage back over from the UK come over here, and in a lot of our storage are things like dowsing rods and equipment which we use for paranormal events. But I think it'd be absolutely fascinating to use it for energy, especially looking for ley lines and especially looking for energy grids where your plants are. And just have a look at this, and I think it'd be fascinating. And anybody wants to come and join us, yes, let's come and do it. And yes, it'd be great. But in the meantime, we've got to go. As per usual, it's absolutely mind-blowingly fascinating, and thank you so much. And a big please pass on our love there to your lovely wife and your son, and also your mad dog.
He's still sitting underneath the steak, mate. He knows what he's getting for his dinner. So
he's a lucky boy. He's a lucky boy.
Unbelievable. Gallego steak, grass-fed beef. What more do you want if you're a little dog?
Oh, brilliant. And to everyone who's joined us tonight, thank you so much for coming along. I know you've been in all areas of the world here. Thank you very much for joining us. Some of you have come through from America, some of them have been in the UK, Spain, and I think a couple there come through from Australia. So thank you very much indeed. And to everybody who commented and joined in. And what can I say? Andy, we'll see you soon. Have a lovely Christmas, friend. And we're going to have big love and veggie burgers. That's it. Good.
Thanks,
okay.
Mate.
Take care of yourself.
I'll see you soon. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.